Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com. I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Korean War era M4A3E8 Sherman tank. The model itself is a commission build and belongs to a private collector. Like I mentioned in my past commission build model showcase videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for pricing and availability information, that information could be found by contacting me through the email address which is listed below. That email address is info@eastcoastarmory.com. The model started off as a Tamiya 1/16 scale full option M4 105 with the HVSS suspension Sherman tank kit. The tank was then converted into an M4A3E8 via the Elite Armor Resin and Photo Etch M4A3E8 conversion set. After doing some research, the Elite Armor conversion set that was used on this model is no longer available. The model arrived at my shop pre-converted as an M4A3E8, and the M4A3E8 conversion was done by a previous builder. I'll be going over what that other builder did in this video. A quick walk around the model. Starting with the model suspension, the model features the stock Tamiya HVSS running gear. The only piece that was added to the running gear seems to be the aftermarket metal HVSS Sherman suspension oil reservoirs. These metal oil reservoirs replace the stock Tamiya plastic oil reservoirs which come with the kit. The metal oil reservoirs are nicely detailed and are a nice addition to the Tamiya model. If you look close at the model's HVSS suspension, you can see that all of the model's Zerk and grease fittings have been painted in red. This is a standard feature on all US Armor AFV, and on the HVSS Sherman, it's a little bit different than that on your standard VVSS. Namely, in that on the VVSS Sherman, the grease fittings are on two wells on opposite side of the center axle. When the VVSS Sherman was replaced with the HVSS suspension design, the design utilized a single Zerk fitting on the hubcap of all the road wheels. This design is featured not only on the main road wheel, but also on the top return roller, as well as the smaller return roller, which is positioned behind the HVSS bogie truck. On this road wheel here, the Zerk fitting would be in the center of the hub. Another modification that was added to the tank was the replacement of the stock Sherman double chevron style track. The kit track was replaced with this all metal die-cast T66 metal track link set. The T66 track links predate the double chevron style in that it's a single pin track link. These track links are very durable and are very nicely done. One advantage about these metal track links, besides giving the tank some added weight, which gives it more traction, is that since they are metal, once you drive the tank around, the paint will begin to scratch on the track, leaving bare metal. This is good in that it actually helps on the realism of the model the more you drive it. One modification that I made to the T66 track links was on the track pins themselves. The track link pins emerge slightly from the T66 link. That small little piece that hangs out, not only is it incorrect in that these track links had a flush appearance to them, but could act as a snag point and can cause issues while the tank is in motion. The way the pins were removed was I took the track, and each link I went ahead and ground off the extra material carefully on the bench grinder. Once all of the extra pin protrusions were eliminated, the track now has its proper look to it and will have no chances of it snagging anything and possibly causing issues. Another area that I modified from the kit original was on the model's transmission cover. As many people know, the Tamiya transmission cover is missing the toe eyes, which would be integrally casted into the transmission cover. Now, M4 Shermans featured several different styles of toe eyes, and the style that I went with is the one with the easier of the toe eyes to fabricate. In addition to the toe eyes being fabricated, another correction that was made to the Tamiya Sherman transmission is on the model's bolt rivet strip. On the stock Tamiya tank, this rivet strip here glues onto the transmission cover, and it leaves a seam where the two pieces join. That seam is not present on the real tank, as the transmission cover is a solid single cast unit, and to remove it, this was done via the bodywork. Once the bodywork was all sanded down, the cast texture was then re-added in its place, where the sanding would have removed the cast texture that would have stood out from the stock cast texture, which is molded in to the One area of the model that received lots of modification as well as conversion was the rear deck as well as the rear lower plate area. Because the Tamiya stock model is that of an M4 105mm Sherman tank, that version of the Sherman is equipped with the same power pack as a standard M4, which would have been the Continental radial engine. Because the model was converted to an M4A3E8, the M4A3E8 utilized the power pack of the M4A3, which was that of the Ford GAA V8 gasoline engine. Because of this conversion, several details had to have been affixed to this area here, which came and were supplied with the Elite Armor M4A3E8 conversion set. Starting with the tow hitches, both the tow hooks as well as the rear tow hitch and tow hitch mount are from the Elite Armor set and are casted in resin. What was done to affix the pieces to the lower hull was that small pins and fasteners were drilled into the center of all the resin aftermarket parts, and then holes were then drilled into the aluminum hull of the tank. Once the pieces were inserted via the fasteners, this left for a much stronger bond, and the pieces are now a lot more robust and can hold up to the wears of radio-controlled use. In addition to the tow hitches, the rear engine axis hatch was also a new addition that came with the Elite Armor conversion set, as well as the most important piece would have been the rear exhaust deflector grille. The rear exhaust deflector grille is part of the Elite Armor set and is a solid resin cast unit. When the model was first received, this part was not attached to the upper hull, instead was affixed to the lower hull. This was not necessarily accurate, and to properly mount it to the Tamiya hull, I had to modify the solid resin piece in having to mill out and hollow out certain portions of the grille work. Namely, the part that the grille work locks onto the upper hull and the portion underneath the grille work where the exhaust manifold would snake out and into the manifold itself. These areas there were solid resin cast and were all milled away to make sure everything fits better as well as has a more realistic look. Before mounting this part of the exhaust grille, the Tamiya Sherman, if anyone can recall, is straight across as follows. Adding the deflector grille was a somewhat simple procedure, in that once it was added, the portion of the resin casting was fused into the top body panel, thus giving it the M4A3 specific proper dip down of the lower plate that we see here. The resulting seam was thoroughly removed and buffed away, thus leaving for a nice seamless appearance. On the real Sherman tank, this exhaust deflector grille is actually pivotable and retracts into this portion here of the hull. Because of that, the lower hull actually extends past the rear firewall and it meets up with the rear wall and the rear plate. This portion here needed to be fabricated out of sheet styrene as it was missing from the Elite Armor resin casting. In addition to extending the rear hull, I also added the small little guards that look like two little paddles. These little paddle guards actually protect on the real Sherman the exhaust deflector grill from any obstructions or any type of debris which would be kicked up by the track. Because the grill work is now integral to the top hull, so is the little box area which was fabricated. To remove the top is still removable, however you need to slide the entire hull back and down in order to clear the exhaust deflector grill from the sponson. Installing the upper hull is done in the reverse manner. You take the entire body, the upper hull, and you slide it onto the sponson in order to have the unit all lock up properly. Hull snaps are stock Tamiya, and on this version of the Tamiya Sherman feature two large clips on either side of the side hull. You simply bend, and then the whole unit just slides off as such. To put the unit on, you simply put it on the reverse way, you take it off. Because of the elaborate way to remove the upper body, the tank is really not designed to be taken apart all that frequently. Because of this, the battery as well as the power switch are all located on the accessible locations so that you can access both charging the battery and operating the model without having to remove and totally disassemble the tank. The one bit of detailing that is not included with the Elite Armor conversion set are the M4A3 goosenecking exhaust system. The gooseneck exhausts that you see on this model here are actually a new item that are listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. This new 1/16 scale product line is listed at the link below, as well as in the video listing. The exhausts themselves are resin cast and have all of their detailing, including their rough cast texturing that you see here. Moving our way up from the suspension leads us to the model's side fenders, which is a noticeable part that distinguishes the M4A3E8 from the other variants of the Sherman family. The fender work that you see here is all stock Tamiya. However, the stock braces, which come with the full option Tamiya kit, were replaced with the aftermarket metal ones that are on the market. These metal braces are a nice detail touch and are also recommended. Specifically, if you have the 1998 and earlier release of the Tamiya Sherman, in which these pieces are not included and in the past had to have been fabricated. One modification that was made to the fender work to help improve the look was the addition of the fender mounting holes. On the real Sherman, the purposes of these extended fenders is so that you could mount on side skirts, and the side skirts can clear the wider track of the HVSS suspension. If we notice, the holes have been added to the side, and the holes and their numbers are all correct as per the real vehicle. Another modification that was made to the fender, which can easily be done and also really helps improve the look of these Tamiya Shermans, is the addition of the split lines on all the fender panels. The Tamiya Sherman has the fender molded as one straight seamless piece, and on the real tank is actually composed of three separate pieces. We have a small section here in the front that connects to the front fender, a long section that runs throughout pretty much most of the length of the hull, and then a smaller section at the rear quarter. It is because of these three sections why we have this interesting layout of the fender mounts. If we notice, we have three here, and then another one that's really close up against it. This is because of the fender being split into three pieces. Same thing here is witnessed in the front. To add the lines are added in the following places. The line splits here for the rear mud flap mount. Another line is added at this junction. Another junction over here in the front quarter. as well as another slit can be added to the front fender. As well as the slit being added to this portion here of the fender, I also like to run it all the way to the end of the fender, thus simulating that the fender is separate from the upper hull. If you want, you can also add 3 small little pins to the front fender, which will simulate the mounting bracket holes. As for adding these slits, the tool that I used was the Dremel Multimax. However, if a Multimax is not part of your toolbox, you could also achieve the same result with an X-Acto saw. Moving our way to the model's headlights. The model headlights and headlights mount are stock. However, what was added is a small little container on each side of the brush guards, which would be for the plunger piece that plugs up the headlight hole when the headlight is removed. On the model's A-frame travel lock, the travel lock is all stock. However, the only addition that was made is a small little finger loop here that is always on the bottom portion of the lock. The purpose of this little finger groove is by moving this up and down actually actuates a block behind the travel lock, which actuates the travel lock fingers that you see here, thus either opening the lock or closing it, clamping the gun barrel in place. As for the model's siren, the kit plastic siren was missing from the model, so a new one was fabricated in its place. Rather than going with the typical siren design, I went ahead and fabricated the funnel horn version of the siren. This funnel horn that you see here is also a new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com 1/16 scale product line, and the set contains the following items. You get the horn, the sheet metal horn mount, as well as a small piece of wire to simulate the power cord, which is seen on the opposite side of the horn. The horn itself can be used on any 1/16 scale US AFV from the World War II time frame. While we're on the front portion of the model, one piece of detailing that was also added was that of the weld beads. On the Tamiya model, the welds are missing from the front glacis plate as well as the rear glacis plate. The welds were added in a way that blends in a lot better with the stock welds that are present on the rest of the vehicle. Moving our way to the bow hatches, the model features an aftermarket fan blower cover as well as aftermarket periscope brush guards. The brush guards and the fan cover are all made out of metal and are a nice addition to the model. The periscope guard that you see here in the driver's section, however, was fabricated as the aftermarket metal brush guard was missing when I received the model. This brush guard here was all fabricated out of wire and blends in very well with the aftermarket sets that you see on the rest of the vehicle. Also added to the rear are the small little drainage holes that are present on this portion here of the armored lip. There's either one, depending on which foundry produced the tank, there's either 1 or 2 small little holes that are in the armored collar to prevent water from pooling up in these areas here. These holes were added to all of the armored collar sections on the model. Moving our way to the rear of the model, the Tamiya kit has the track grouser container vent cover molded into the upper deck. One addition that I made, which is a simple addition that could be done to any of the Tamiya 1/16 scale Shermans, was the addition of the photo etch mesh that is missing from the kit. The addition of the mesh also gives a little bit of detail to this section over here. Like I mentioned earlier, the rear portion of the model received the most amount of conversion to convert the model to an M4A3E8. The whole engine deck that you see here is part of the Elite Armor conversion set. The set gives you the M4A3 engine deck with the center mounted radiator fluid cap, as well as photo etch grill work for the model's engine grates. This portion here of the model came pre-installed from the previous builder and was installed very well. So no additions were made to this section here. The only modifications that were made to the engine deck were the addition of the wire handles, as well as the wire handles being added to the rest of the vehicle. The model's center filler cap here was also fabricated. This portion here was missing on the original model. To properly replicate the piece, I went ahead and made a quick mold of one of the fluid caps here and casted it in a disposable mold to give me the center fuel cap. Because of this, the fuel cap blends in with the other three as if it was meant to be. Another addition was the addition here of the model's fire extinguisher handles. This portion was missing on the model, and a new version was fabricated out of plastic and resin. On the reverse side of the model, we could see all of the model's Pioneer tools. All these tools are stock Tamiya, and were simply just painted and mounted to the vehicle. One thing as of note on American tanks, the tools are held onto the tank via both metal clips for the larger items, as well as leather belts, which keep everything nice and secure. The turret comes with the turret casting, the mantlet, an aluminum gun barrel, as well as a resin gun muzzle. The resin gun muzzle required some reworking to improve the shape a bit. Here we can see a photograph of what the muzzle looked like originally. As you can see, it was really squarish in appearance, and on the Sherman with the M1 76mm gun, the muzzle was a lot more rounder in shape. The muzzle was reworked to give it the more appropriate shape that you see here. The mantlet, as you can see, has all of the tarpaulin mounts molded in, like I mentioned before, as well as the cast texture, and even the casting numbers, which is a nice touch. Moving our way from the mantlet gives us to the rest of the turret. As like I mentioned before, it's got all of its nicely fine details molded in, including the trunnion mount for the mantlet, tarpaulin mounts, fine cast texture, mold seams, rear blower fans, spent shell ejection port, as well as also the casting marks. Also molded into the turret's casting is that of the Tank Commander's late war single hatch copula. The copula itself also includes its hatch as well as also its loader's hatch. These pieces here are functional, and they do have their interior detailing. The copula itself is adequately detailed, however it's not as detailed as the replacement hatches for the Tamiya tanks that are on the market. Also included with the Elite Armor set is that of the periscope guard box. The vane sight that you see here is actually the Tamiya version, but was slightly modified in having its holes drilled in, which are absent on the Tamiya tank. One portion of the turret that received a little bit of scratch building was that of the 50 caliber storage rack system. These rails were missing from the kit when I received it. However, the mounts were there, so they could have been offered with the original set. These rails that you see here are fabricated by myself out of styrene angle and actually are embedded into the tank, as this section here was actually hollowed out. The purpose of installing it this way as opposed to simply gluing it to the tank is that this design is a lot stronger and more robust than gluing it onto the model surface. Also, which was fabricated, was the 50 caliber clamping system clamps that you see here. The clamps themselves are all made out of brass and sheet metal and are actually fully functional. They are really scaled down versions of the 1/6 scale ones that you see on my other 1/6 scale American tanks. The 50 caliber clamps, in addition to this piece here, was also fabricated. That piece there is intended to clamp onto the barrel cooling shroud on the M2 when the gun is stowed in the side panel that we have here. The pintle itself is the stock Tamiya one. All that was added was that of the little grab handle, which unlocks the pintle from the gun cradle when it's in the stowed mount. Another modification that was made to the turret was the hollowing out of the air blower system here. The stock kit, this piece here, is solid, and the indentation for the air blower is missing. That piece was engraved into the turret casting. Moving our way to the 50 caliber machine gun, the pintle mount that you see here is the Elite Armor kit original and had to be modified. The original Elite Armor mount was way taller than you see here. The original mount actually came up to this portion here of the cradle. And then once the gun would be installed on top of that, the gun would have been positioned way too tall. From what I've seen with several other 1/16 scale models that are on the net, this seems to be a common error with people's models. The Sherman M2 pintle mount that you see here is a lot shorter than a lot of models like to represent them. Also, what was fabricated was that of the retracting hinge that you see here. These pintle mounts can fold and retract away when the tank would be in storage mode. And then when the gun would be needed to be installed, the piece would hinge upward and the 4 bolts would be reinstalled into the mount, keeping it nice and rigid. Also, what was installed was, just like on the storage pintle, the lock handle for the 50 caliber gun. The M2 HB that you see here, as well as the M23 cradle, is stock Tamiya and was supplied with the kit. The model, when I received it, the gun was missing the carry handle for the barrel. The carry handle was refabricated out of metal wire and drilled into the barrel to prevent it from getting loose. The top cover plate for the feed tray is also functional. And so you get to see the bolt face detailing on the M2. The M23 cradle is also functional in that it hinges open and the ammo box can be put in the ammo tray. Moving our way to the model's MP48 spring antenna base. This spring antenna base that you see here is another new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com 1/16 scale product line. The antenna base is a shrunk down version of my 1/6 scale counterpart and features all of the same details, such as the antenna locking bolts, as well as the ceramic center section here. The piece also features a real spring and is flexible, just like the 1/6 scale and real counterparts. Itself is the actual RC aerial antenna and is what connects to the model's RC receiver. To affix the piece to the tank, I had to do some modifications to the rear bustle. The resin kit, this portion here of the rear of the turret is solid resin. The previous builder did not want to hollow out this section, so he drilled a small hole right in front of the copula to mount the antenna. This location was incorrect, and so his original mount was deleted. This section here was hollowed out via the drill press, and then allowed me to snake the wire for the aerial base antenna into this little channel over here. With that, the turret now has its proper MP48 in its proper location, and it also serves as the aerial. As I mentioned before, the previous builder did do a very good job in mating the Tamiya turret ring to that of the Elite Armor resin turret. One thing that the previous builder didn't do, though, was he did not make the turret fully removable from the body. One modification that I did was I went ahead and made quick disconnect jacks on all of the turret's umbilicals so that the turret can be fully disconnected from the lower hull without any need to remove the upper body from the tank. Because the tank is radio controlled, I needed to get access to both the power switch as well as the tank's recharge. Now, because the tank is pre-built and is detailed as well as having an elaborate paint job, making the upper body disconnect all the time proves to be problematic. So all of the details need to be accessible while the tank is closed. Also, unlike the later versions of the Tamiya 1/16 scale tanks, namely like the M26 Pershing, in which the bow hatches are functional, on this older Tamiya tank, the bow hatches are molded shut. There's only one way into the model, and that is via the top hatches. The Elite Armor set does feature the hatches that are functional, and because of this made perfect room for installation of the access switches. If I open up the loader's hatch, I have here the main power switch, easily accessible and easily covered up by the hatch itself. Also, to charge the tank, that is facilitated via the commander's copula hatch. I open up the hatch, and I pull this green little tab here, which emerges out the recharge jack. While the tank's not in use, you just simply hook this up to the tank's recharger, and the tank can be recharged with the battery still inside the tank. After recharging is complete, you simply stuff the charge jack back into the turret, and you close the hatch. As I mentioned earlier, the previous builder who did the conversion did make the turret ring from the 105 to the 76mm turret, and he also added the elevator. One detail that the builder did not incorporate was that of the gun recoil. The gun still has its photostrobe and still flashes when you hit the firing button. However, the barrel stays put and does not recoil like that of your usual Tamiya 1/16 scale tanks. As for the model's paint scheme, the client specified to have his tank painted for the Korean War with that of the tiger face. Similar to the M4A3E8 style Pershing that I did a little while ago, this tank was painted with the same type of manner. All of the tiger face and markings that you see here are all hand painted and hand applied. No stencils or decals were used on the model. Like I mentioned in the other Korean War tank video that I've done, during the Korean War, when the Chinese got involved in the conflict, the idea came to paint the tanks like tigers. The idea was that the Chinese, who were superstitious, would see the tiger face tanks and would be intimidated by them. Not sure how effective the idea was, but it did leave for a very unique era in American armor. Also, as of note, the Korean War patterns are probably one of my favorite post-World War II paint schemes to paint, and I always fell in love with them the minute I saw this box art here on the side of the Tamiya boxes when I was a child. Years, I've built my fair share of Korean War tiger face tanks, from 1/76 scale to 1/35 scale to even one of the few in 1/6 scale. But that's another story. As I mentioned earlier, underneath the model's hood is your standard Tamiya 1/16 scale full option kit, which means it has all the same features as well as controls. If I turn on the radio again, we'll start up the engine. This control stick here, left and right, rotates the turret, and up and down elevates the gun. And this control stick here controls the tank's movement. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the tank's bow machine gun does have its fiber optic light. And the model does still retain its photostrobe for the main gun blast. However, the tank's gun does not recoil. I will now take the tank for a couple laps. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Tamiya M4A3E8 Korean War Sherman tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds as well as 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.